Hey guys, welcome back. Been getting a lot of questions and comments, both on my videos and Instagram posts and stuff like that, of one of the cars that everybody keeps seeing in the background. And so, I think it's time to do a video of my 69 Dodge Charger Daytona clone that I've been building. So, to give a little bit of background on this car, when I bought this, it was just a plain Jane 3D3 2-barrel 69 Charger. The only real cool factory option of it was Q5 Seafoam Turquoise. So other than that, I had a real just clean base to work from. So my original intentions with it were to just restore it as a 69 Charger. I wanted to keep the Q5 Turquoise. But with it not being original, with it having sat outside since 1984, I believe it was riddled with hail, and it wasn't the cleanest bodies. It does have some rust, things like that. So I was able to kind of do what I wanted with it at that point. And to back up even a little bit further, I've had an idea for the longest time of how cool and pretty much absolutely ridiculous it would be to cruise around in a Daytona. And a real one is just completely out of the question, so the clone was always on my mind from that point. And one of the things you can do with that is run a Vega hatchback, which I ended up learning from the movie Joe Dirt, of all places. His Daytona that he drove in that, did some research on that. The guy who owned that used a Vega hatchback. So I've known about this for a very long time, even before I owned this car. And after owning this, that was one of the ideas that ran through my head. But it just seemed really impractical at the time, so I started following through with actually restoring this back to a 69 Charger. But all my other projects kind of popped up amongst that. I had my 66 Charger, I had my 68 Charger, and then again my second 68 Charger, and I have a couple other projects, my trucks, things like that. And it ended up being to where I wanted to have this be more of a fun car. One of the things with wanting to do a Daytona is obviously finding all the parts for it. One of the big ones was the filled-in back window. If I was going to do a clone, I wanted to do it right and make it look the part. So I had that kind of in the back of my head, looking for parts-wise. If I ever ran across anything, I would. And I ended up being at the junkyard one day, didn't even know this car was there, and was able to purchase at one of those pick-apart junkyards a Chevy Vega hatchback. The glass and trim was gone, but the hatch was still there. And I forget, it was on a holiday of some sort, whatever, so it was like 40% off on that day or something. With tax, I think I paid $22 for the hatchback. So I had that now in my possession and brought that home. I ended up taking a bunch of pictures of that sitting on a couple different cars, just kind of playing with the idea again. And that still seemed kind of out of the realm of possibilities. So I ended up just tucking the hatchback, away in storage, and just kept continuing on with rebuilding this car. And I ended up cleaning up the grill in this, cleaned up the fenders. I was getting the body kind of stripped, getting it ready to begin body work and stuff. Amongst one of those, I started the rust repair. Well, I pulled out the back window. When I did pull out the back window, I found a lot more rust than I kind of anticipated finding. And so I was stuck there looking at this rusty back window, and my dad chimed up, kind of laughed, "Hey, jokingly, I know a good way to cover that up." And I laughed because I knew exactly where he was going with that. And because of that, I ended up pulling out my Vega hatchback out of storage and started fiddling around with the idea of making a Daytona out of it again. And of course, that is the direction I went. Now that I've made the decision to turn this into a Daytona, I didn't have any parts for the Daytona conversion except for the hatchback, and that was it. So that was my starting place. Since the back window was rusty, I didn't care about that anymore. Let's more or less cover it up and start the Vega hatch conversion. And so with that, I started with the hatch. It doesn't fit very well just as the hatchback. So started with trimming up the sides. You got to trim up the sides to pretty much nothing. I took the understructure out on the hatch on the bottom side, and that way I was able to sit in the hole much better at that point. And the kind of funny, neat, kind of scary thing, if you will, about this, there's no instructions when it comes to this, so it's more or less just winging it. And you got to trim and test fit and trim and test fit and tweak and test fit and just make it pretty much to where you're happy with it and it sits where it should. And having trimmed up the sides as I did, you trim those up to where they basically fit flush with the side of each B-pillar, and you're going to end up with a pretty big gap at the top. In one of those, you then have this coming back, you got to shorten up the deck lid, and that in itself was a whole another huge project. But now that I had that thing sitting there kind of where it was, you can figure out where it needs to sit. Fortunately, with the power of the internet nowadays, I was able to find a pretty good parts list online of what I needed to find. One of those was a 71 to 74 Charger Dutchman panel, and you use that to mate the Vega hatchback to the 69 Charger deck lid, and that's your filler piece for your new channel for your deck lid seal to go. One of the problems that I ran into was there was no measurements online or anything like that as to where to cut, how many inches to cut the deck lid back to, things like that. So before actually welding the Dutchman panel in place, I had that sitting where I wanted it, where it fit nicely with the hatchback itself. So I used that as a baseline measurement to measure from here to the back of the quarter panel. And with that, I was able to then measure off my deck lid and figure out where I needed to make a cut. And from there, I left a 1/2 inch hanging over, and I actually used the Dutchman panel itself, since it does have a soft curve to it, as a template, and just ran my Sharpie line with that, and that's where I made my cut. And then I just actually folded the edge over, so it looks like I have a factory appearing edge, and made it actually fit together quite nicely, and I have a decent seam. I will have some finish work to do still, but this is where it's at now. With this being a budget build and not wanting to spend the money on actual hinges, I ended up taking an old pair that I had and combining them with the 69 Charger ones. The Daytona basically just uses a bigger droop in the hinge itself so that it clears the extended Dutchman panel. And with that, I ended up building my own brackets to the old deck lid, which actually gives me more adjustment than the old original Daytona's ones did, since I am building all this myself. The Daytonas from factory, or I guess from Creative Industries, used a filler cap to shorten the deck lid. I looked into purchasing one of those because they are reproduced in fiberglass only, and one of the problems I ran into was I wasn't sure if they would match up with the curvature of my Dutchman panel that I had, so I ended up deciding to build my own. I rolled over the edge of the deck lid to give it the factory appearance, and then I made my own cap to shorten up the deck lid. And what I ended up doing was making it more or less oversized because I wasn't quite sure where the seal was going to meet up with it. And so what my plans are with it is I'll end up finishing welding it so it's solid, and then I'll just seam seal it like they did on the originals and paint it, and it'll look somewhat factory. Now that I had started this Daytona project, I just had the back window done. I was then on the hunt for some parts, and I was fortunate enough to be able to find a used reproduction wing. So I got that picked up, and that was actually super easy to put on. Now that I had a wing, I ended up searching online and everything like that, trying to find measurements as to where this thing sat, and I came up with nothing. So finally it was just, well, let's just kind of see where it fits. And it turns out that on your driver's side here, there's really only one spot it fits. You curve up here on the front to get to your gas cap, and you curve up on the back here to get to your tail panel. And it basically, there's only one spot that's completely flat that this thing sits. So once I had this side measured out, it was easy enough to mark the other side. I got my distances from the back of the quarter panel on both sides, and then just set it up, had it sitting where it needed to be, marked the holes with a Sharpie, and drilled the holes and mounted it down. With the wing, the way these are designed, they produce quite a bit of downforce, even at just regular highway speeds. So one of the things you gotta do is do trunk supports. And so when I did find this wing, I was fortunate enough to get the wing supports with it. So I did go ahead and put those in the trunk, which was the same thing, pretty straightforward of just sitting it where it lines up and drilling some holes. One of the things also unique to the Daytona was its front end. The standard 69 Charger front end didn't mate up well to a nose cone, so Chrysler ended up actually tooling a front end to mate up with a nose cone, and that's what they brought over to the 1970 model year. So with that, you need to run 1970 Charger hood and fenders, and that allows you to mate up the nose cone. And I was able to actually find a guy that traded me my 69 front end for a 70 front end. My 69 front end was in near perfect condition. These ones were pretty rough, but I initially thought that my only option was going to be fiberglass because these are not reproduced. So I'm actually super happy I was able to find a metal hood and fender, even though they need quite a bit of work. Now I can actually have a metal front end and not fiberglass. With my car being a factory 383 car, and I was originally restoring it back to kind of original condition, I wanted to keep a 383 in it. So I ended up putting a 383 in this before I started the Daytona conversion. Now that I have started the Daytona conversion, the standard equipment on a Daytona was a 440, and the only other option was the Hemi. So with that, I am going to end up putting a 440 back in this, which I have, and yanking out the 383 that's currently in it. So with everything that I've done to this car, this is now a full-on project. I'm not going to do it kind of like I did my General Mayhem of just getting it running and driving. I do want to end up doing this car to a full restoration, if you will. So this is going to be a long-term project, so you will see more of it throughout all my videos. Whether it becomes weekly videos or monthly videos, I will keep everybody updated to the progress on this, as this is going to become a fully restored 69 Dodge Charger Daytona clone.